This ceasefire did not solve the crisis. It only paused the most visible part of it while the deeper risks kept building underneath. Markets reacted fast, as if the worst was already over. The S&P 500 added nearly $2 trillion in value. Global stocks pushed higher. Oil pulled back. On the surface, it looked like relief had arrived. But one detail stood out right away. Gold prices were still rising, and that told a very different story. Real confidence was still missing. That matters because the situation remains extremely unstable. Over the next 2 weeks, this still looks like a coin flip. There is no finalized peace agreement that Iran is happy with, and without that, the ceasefire remains fragile by definition. The guns may have gone quieter for a moment, but the pressure points that drove this crisis are still there. That became clear only hours after the ceasefire, when a stunning drone attack hit Saudi Arabia's east-west pipeline. This is not some minor energy route. It carries close to 5 million barrels a day to the Red Sea. That makes it one of the most important outlets for Saudi oil exports to the global market. The full damage is still being assessed, but the message was obvious. Critical infrastructure on both sides remains vulnerable, and the market has no reason to assume these risks have disappeared. If that pipeline suffers heavier damage, or if pumping stations are destroyed, even more supply could be cut off, and once supply starts tightening again, crude prices can turn higher very quickly. That would send another shock through the entire system. So the early market celebration looks premature. Stocks are acting like the crisis has peaked. Gold is warning that it has not. Oil has cooled for now, but the foundations of the supply shock are still in place. And when the structure is this weak, leverage becomes the only question that matters. Washington is already trying to answer that question in public. Officials are saying Iran accepted the ceasefire under overwhelming pressure and that the United States forced Tehran to back down. That is the version of events they want attached to this moment, and politically, it is easy to understand why. With elections ahead and the conflict still fresh, they need a story that looks controlled, decisive, and successful.
You see, had Iran refused our terms, the next targets would have been their power plants, their bridges, and oil and energy infrastructure. Targets they could not defend. President Trump had the power to cripple Iran's entire economy in minutes. But he chose mercy. He spared those targets because Iran accepted the ceasefire under overwhelming pressure.
But once you look at the actual negotiations, that image starts to break down. Iran's original 10-point plan was still highly maximalist, and the core demands were serious. Tehran wants primary sanctions removed because those sanctions directly block its ability to export oil to the world. It also wants secondary sanctions removed because those punish any country that trades with Iran. If those restrictions are lifted, even Europe could begin buying and selling Iranian goods again without facing punishment from Washington. That is where the real pressure shows up, and Trump now looks on the verge of capitulating. The US is still demanding zero uranium enrichment, and the framework being discussed appears much closer to a JCPOA-style arrangement than to total Iranian surrender. On top of that, the United States is now openly talking about tariff and sanctions relief. That is a major concession to even put on the table. At the same time, Trump is threatening 50% tariffs on any country supplying military support to Iran. But that threat is full of holes. It would be extremely difficult to track every shipment. Russian oil supply is still too important to global markets. China also has a powerful response available through rare earth exports. If Beijing cuts those off, pressure would hit American weapons production and chip manufacturing almost immediately. And through all of this, Iran still holds leverage where it matters most. It controls Hormuz, and that keeps the pressure on energy markets. American consumers are already feeling it. Gas prices are up 30%, and that changes the balance very quickly. Once that pain starts spreading, the real pressure moves into oil prices. Before the war intensified, crude was trading around $65 a barrel. Then in March, it surged to over $110. That kind of move does not stay inside the energy sector. It spreads through the whole global economy. Production costs rise, shipping gets more expensive, imports cost more. Countries like Japan and Korea, which depend heavily on imported energy, get hit especially hard, and that pressure feeds into everything they sell back to the world. That is why Iran's position is improving so quickly. Under heavy sanctions, Tehran was forced to sell most of its crude at steep discounts. More than 90% of Iranian oil exports were going to Chinese refineries because only buyers with enough scale and political cover could take that risk. Some of those barrels were selling at discounts of more than $10 per barrel. That was the price of being locked out of the wider market. Now that pressure is starting to ease, the pricing power changes fast. Those discounts can flip into premiums. Iran is no longer stuck pushing out sanctioned barrels at the cheapest possible rate. In a tight market, buyers will pay more to secure supply, and Iran knows it. There are two big reasons that upside could grow even further. First, Iran still controls Hormuz. In a stressed market, that gives Iranian vessels a natural advantage. Their cargo could move with priority, and they could avoid a potential $2 million toll that others may have to absorb. Second, the broader oil shock is still not over. The world is dealing with a supply deficit of 15 to 20 million barrels a day. That keeps demand for every available barrel extremely high. So Iran stands to earn more money per barrel, with more cash flowing in and more leverage over the market. That helps explain why Japan has been seeking dialogue and why Italy's Meloni went directly to the Middle East. And when energy stress starts driving those kinds of decisions, it begins to show up in places far beyond crude itself. One of the clearest signals appeared in the bond market. In a normal panic, money usually runs into US treasuries. This time, that did not happen cleanly. Treasuries actually fell instead of rallying, and that sends a very important signal. Investors were not behaving like they were moving into a trusted safe haven. They were behaving like they needed liquidity. You could see that pressure across several assets at once. Treasuries were sold, gold was sold, Japanese stocks were sold as well. That kind of broad selling tells you something deeper is happening under the surface. Investors were raising cash wherever they could because the energy shock was creating stress across the system. When oil risk starts forcing liquidations in assets that are usually treated as defensive, the problem is no longer limited to one region or one commodity. That is why the ceasefire mattered so much to Washington. It was never only about calming headlines or reducing military tension. It also helped prevent a more dangerous breakdown in the bond market. If the Hormuz disruption had continued, treasury prices could have come under much heavier pressure. And if treasuries break down, yields rise fast. Once yields start jumping sharply in an already fragile system, borrowing costs move higher, financial conditions tighten, and the damage spreads quickly. There is another pressure point here that should not be ignored. Countries like Japan are highly exposed to imported energy costs. If energy bills keep rising, governments and institutions need cash to absorb that shock. One way to raise it is by selling foreign reserves, including US treasuries. That creates another layer of pressure on the bond market at exactly the wrong moment.
The Iranians originally put forward a 10-point plan that was fundamentally unserious, unacceptable, and completely discarded. It was literally thrown in the garbage by President Trump and his negotiating team. Many outlets in this room have falsely reported on that plan as being acceptable to the United States, and that is false. With the president's deadline fast approaching and the United States military completely decimating Iran with each passing hour, the regime acknowledged reality to the negotiating team. They put forward a more reasonable and entirely different and condensed plan to the president and his team.
So even with the ceasefire in place, the deeper message from markets is still uncomfortable. The real risk is spreading through the financial system itself, and from there, it moves straight into the currency. The dollar is now telling that story very clearly. During the conflict, there was no strong rush into the US currency, even though this was exactly the kind of crisis where the dollar is supposed to benefit from safe haven demand. That bid never looked convincing. Money was not flowing into dollar assets with real confidence. And once the ceasefire arrived, that weakness became harder to hide. The dollar dropped about 1% and gave back all of its gains for the year. That reaction matters because it shows the market does not believe the underlying problem has been solved. The ceasefire may have reduced immediate oil panic, but it did not fix the deeper pressures sitting underneath the economy. Those pressures are now feeding directly into a policy trap for Washington. Inflation is still high, which means the Fed cannot cut rates easily without risking another wave of price pressure. At the same time, the economy is weakening badly enough that markets are starting to price in easier policy anyway. The odds of a December rate cut have risen to 22%, up from near zero just a few weeks ago. That is not a small shift. It shows expectations are changing fast, and the reason is simple. The economic strain is spreading on multiple fronts at once. Annual deficits are running near $2 trillion. War spending is already above $30 billion and still climbing. On top of that, Trump wants another $1.5 trillion to expand the military. The bond market sees all of that. Corporate America sees it too. Meanwhile, the real economy is losing momentum. Job growth has gone from around 100,000 monthly gains to negative. Households are getting squeezed by rising energy costs, higher food prices, elevated mortgage pressure, and more expensive goods. Those costs stack on top of each other until something starts to break. That leaves very few ways out. Rates are hard to cut. Spending is still massive. Growth is slowing. The easiest release valve becomes the currency itself. And that points straight back toward a weaker dollar and another round of currency debasement. That is why the ceasefire matters beyond the battlefield. It has created a pause, but the next phase will be decided by what Washington does now. Markets are no longer focused only on military headlines. They are waiting for a policy decision. What happens next depends on how far the United States is willing to go to keep oil flowing and whether it is prepared to change course under pressure. That decision will shape the market response from here far more than the ceasefire itself. For now, the pause has not restored trust. It has only shifted attention. Traders, governments, and energy buyers are all waiting for the same thing: a clear signal on sanctions, on Hormuz, and on whether this standoff is being contained or quietly transformed into something bigger. So the real question now is simple. Will Washington fully reverse sanctions to open Hormuz and stabilize oil? Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like and share the video. See you in the next one.